Amid the fire and fury of the French Revolution, a new France was being forged, a republic born from the ashes of monarchy. But this fledgling republic was fragile, besieged from within and without. In the port city of Toulon, royalists, backed by British and Spanish fleets, had seized control, a dagger aimed at the heart of the revolution. The French Republican army laid siege, but for months their efforts were futile, their command incompetent. The situation was desperate. Into this chaos stepped a young, unknown artillery captain, his name barely a whisper on the winds of war, Napoleon Bonaparte. He was just 24, a Corsican outsider with a thick accent, looked down upon by the Parisian elite. But in his eyes burned an ambition as fierce as the cannons he commanded. He surveyed the stalemate at Toulon, not with despair, but with the cold, calculating gaze of a predator. He saw what the seasoned generals had missed. He argued, he pleaded, he insisted. The key was not a frontal assault, but in capturing the high ground, the forts of Le Gillette and Balaguire, which overlooked the harbor. From there his artillery could rain hellfire upon the enemy fleet, forcing them to abandon the city. His plan was audacious, bordering on insane. The generals, steeped in the old ways of war, dismissed him. But the political commissar on site, Augustin Robespierre, younger brother of the infamous Maximilian, saw the fire in the young captain. He saw genius. Napoleon was given his chance. He worked relentlessly, transforming the artillery arm from a disorganized rabble into a disciplined, deadly force. He slept by his guns, shared the dangers with his men, and personally aimed the cannons that would decide the fate of Toulon. He was everywhere, a whirlwind of energy and intellect, his mind a chessboard where he moved cannons like kings. The final assault was a storm of biblical proportions. Under the cover of a fierce downpour, Napoleon led his men up the muddy slopes toward the enemy forts. The fighting was brutal, hand to hand in the dark. A British bayonet pierced his thigh, a wound that would nearly cost him his leg, but he fought on. By morning the French flag flew over the captured forts, and just as Napoleon predicted, the British admiral, Lord Hood, seeing his ships now sitting ducks under the French guns, had no choice but to evacuate. Toulon had fallen. The name Napoleon Bonaparte was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. For his decisive role, he was promoted from captain to brigadier general. The Prodigy had arrived. But the revolution was a fickle beast. The same political tides that lifted him up could just as easily drag him under. The fall of the Robespierre family during the Thermidorian reaction saw Napoleon briefly imprisoned, his career hanging by a thread. He was a general without a command, wandering the streets of Paris, impoverished and uncertain. The hero of Toulon was nearly a forgotten footnote. Yet destiny had other plans. In October 1795, a new threat arose. A massive royalist mob, 30,000 strong, prepared to march on the National Convention, the seat of the revolutionary government. They intended to crush the Republic and restore the monarchy. The government was in panic. They had only 5,000 troops, and the commander was wavering. In their desperation, they remembered the young general who had saved them at Toulon. And so a powerful political leader named Paul Barras summoned Napoleon. Here was his second chance. Napoleon didn't hesitate. He knew the city's layout intimately. He knew the mob's weakness was its lack of firepower. His orders were immediate and precise. He dispatched a cavalry officer named Joachim Murat on a frantic midnight ride to seize a park of cannons before the royalists could. Murat succeeded, dragging 40 cannons back through the dark streets. Napoleon positioned them strategically, turning the narrow avenues leading to the Tuileries Palace into kill zones. He was calm, methodical, a surgeon preparing for a delicate yet brutal operation. As the royalist columns advanced, they were met not with musket fire, but with a storm of metal. Napoleon gave the order. With a whiff of grape shot, as he would later call it, his cannons tore through the dense ranks of the mob. The streets ran red. The attack faltered, then broke completely. In a matter of hours the insurrection was crushed. The revolution was saved. not by politicians' speeches, but by the cold, hard logic of artillery. Napoleon had turned the streets of Paris into his own personal fortress. He was no longer just a talented general. He was the savior of the Republic, the indispensable man. His reward was swift and substantial, command of the army of Italy. The other generals, men of noble birth and long service, looked at this young, gaunt, 26-year-old upstart with a mixture of fear and contempt. They saw his unkempt hair, his ill-fitting uniform, his intense, almost unsettling stare. They thought they could intimidate him, control him. They were wrong. When he addressed them for the first time, his presence filled the room. The slouch was gone, replaced by an erect, commanding posture. His voice, sharp and clear, cut through their skepticism. He laid out his plans for the Italian campaign with a clarity and brilliance that left them stunned. In that moment they understood. This was not a man to be trifled with. They were in the presence of someone who saw war not as a series of disconnected battles, but as a grand, sweeping symphony of movement, logistics, and psychology. Their fear began to morph into a grudging and then an absolute admiration. The legend of Napoleon had truly begun. From the fires of Toulon to the bloody streets of Paris, a new master of war had risen from the chaos, and Europe would never be the same. Thank you for watching, and be sure to follow for the next chapter in this epic story.